Is this the most capable outdoors/fitness watch at this price range? That comes with a huge caveat, as I was able to find the watch new and sealed on eBay for £225, far below the recommended retail price. It was only available in the copper brown colourway, which looks goofy in photos online, but is surprisingly nice in real life. At the same time, I found a nearly new Polar Loop with an unworn spare strap, so I bought them both to try. These are my thoughts after the first few weeks with both devices. I'm not going to go into huge technical detail on the hardware side, but the Grit X2 is definitely a premium feeling watch. The metal bezel gives a pleasingly rugged aesthetic, and the strap is surprisingly malleable and comfortable on the skin, though that is a pretty subjective point. It's also pretty flat and wide, so it fits under sleeves easily. We'll see how it fares in the medium to long term, but early impressions are good. The screen is an absolute beauty. Images I'd seen in reviews online definitely didn't do it justice. This was one of the reasons I was hesitant to upgrade from my Garmin Instinct 2, more on that later, but I needn't have worried. It really is pleasant to look at and interact with, though there is a bit of a dead zone between the display and the raised metal bezel. Button-wise, you get 5, but in a reverse layout to Garmin, so you might have to unlearn some muscle memory if you're moving systems. I was definitely surprised by how small the watch is. It looked pretty chunky in images I'd seen online, but it isn't massive by any means. Having used the watch for running and sleep tracking for a few weeks now, I'm starting to get a handle on it. My first fear was battery anxiety, coming from a watch that had 2 to 3 week battery life. So far this hasn't been an issue, as the watch is quick to charge. On the previous operating system, 4.0, the battery percentage would pop into view every time I raised my wrist. It would come down from the top there. But on the 5.0 update, it hides it on the quick access menu along the top, which you can access by swiping down at the top of the screen. I like this change. Taking the battery level out of my line of sight means I think about it less, but I know the watch would prompt me to charge should it get too low. Battery drain during runs and overnight has been pretty reasonable. At my current level of use, I'm charging it about once a week with all the default settings intact. Screen brightness, raise to wake, etc. Plenty for most weeks, and the USB-C charging cable is super low profile, so no major drama to take away with you on a longer trip. In fact, where is that? To begin with, the watch did seem to struggle with nailing down the right time in terms of me falling asleep at night, especially if I lay in bed reading beforehand. With use, it seems to have improved over time as the sample size has increased. Side note, but the Loop seemed to fare better at this straight off the rip, but that could have been a fluke. To begin with, I did miss the morning report feature that Garmin has, but with the 5.0 firmware update, you get more options for shortcuts on your home screen, and I've added one that takes me right into my sleep summary. Running with the X2 has been an absolute joy once I unlearned some of the muscle memory and figured out how to start, pause and end a run. The screen is super easy to see on your wrist, and I like the fact that it would change to a white background temporarily when you hit your lap marker. Very easy to glance at. So far I'm having a better time using the watch to get a summary of my sleep and activities, whereas with my Instinct 2 I would be constantly poking around in the app, purely because the watch screen held less glanceable data. There's a lot of chat online about a long overdue Polar app refresh, so watch this space. Oddly enough, I found it refreshing because I don't have my nose in my phone as much, poking about in my stats. I have tried one pool swim since getting the watch, and I found it gifted me 25 meters early on in my swim, but was very accurate besides that bogey length. The screen is very easy to see at a glance, above or below the water. One of the reasons I bought this watch was the potential to use it to navigate trail runs and stuff like that. I haven't actually tried this feature yet, but I do have an event coming up later in the year that will require following a trail. The Instinct 2, although you can do some level of breadcrumb navigation, it just doesn't have the capacity for maps like the Polar Grit X2 does. As I mentioned before, I got the Loop at the same time as the Grit X2. There are a few factors in this: sheer curiosity, a desire to cut down on screen time, as well as see if I could run based on vibes alone while still keeping a track of my mileage and stuff like that. The first hiccup I encountered was trying to swap between devices quickly, for example when I put the X2 on to charge. Because the Loop has no physical buttons, you have to turn it off via the app, and to reawaken it you need to plug in the charger. I hadn't heard this mentioned in any reviews I'd read or watched, or at least hadn't appreciated the practicalities of it if I did. Often I would go to slip the Loop over my wrist, only to find it had come off by itself at some point in the intervening period, meaning the battery was flat and it would need charged again. So I would often need to top up the Loop in the morning before I charged the X2. As it stands, you can't trust it to hold a charge and be ready for you if you're planning on running two devices. A physical on and off switch would be great in my opinion. In terms of running, the Loop uses your phone's GPS and you record your run using the Flow app. Recording your run in this way means you lose some of the premium features associated with the X2, like Polar's running index metric, although that says I'm an elite runner, so I would take that with a pinch of salt anyway. Basically, you could achieve the same results by connecting a Polar HR strap to the app, something I wish I'd realised before buying the Loop, because I already have a HR strap. So the main advantage to the Loop is general daily health and sleep tracking. The Flow app makes this much harder to keep tabs on than Garmin Connect, but more on that later. Specifically, with sleep tracking, you lose the skin temperature of the X2, so if you're swapping between devices, you will lose some data. Oddly enough, I do still quite like the Loop. Sometimes having a barrage of notifications coming through on my wrist when wearing the X2 is distracting, but the flip side is that I'm reaching for my phone more when wearing the Loop because I can't easily see if the vibration I feel in my pocket is something that requires attention or not. If I had a nice mechanical watch, I could definitely see the appeal of wearing a Loop on one wrist and the watch on the other, so maybe it's time for me to bust out the £50 Timex I wear to weddings more often. The default black strap that came with my Loop looked a bit cheap and nasty, and I much prefer their colour options. I currently have the orange one, but I'm keen to try out the navy and green versions as well. As I mentioned earlier, my previous watch was a Garmin Instinct 2. I ended up with the 2 after a couple of warranty replacements of the first gen Instinct, after it developed a fault recording activities. I had no such problems with the second gen version. The most obvious similarity is the 5-button setup, although you can see the layout is essentially reversed. 3 on that side, 2 on the other. I'm still getting to grips with this on the Polar, but as I wear my watch on my right wrist, I do miss having most of the button functionality on the left side of the watch. The major hardware difference is the screen. I do find the screen on the Instinct genuinely pleasing to look at, as it is a pretty clean display and easy to see. I did find myself regularly toggling the backlight in order to read it in certain lighting conditions, which is not an issue on the ultra bright screen of the Polar. Is a fancy screen a fair trade-off for roughly 2 weeks less battery life? Probably not, but again, it is worth mentioning that the screen looks profoundly nicer on the Polar than in the press images I'd seen, so you really do need to see it to do it justice. The general disdain for the Polar Flow app is well publicised online, and it does feel like a long-promised overhaul would be welcome. The key difference for me is not the data being recorded by the watch, but the ease with which you can access it from the app. Garmin does a good job of letting you set up a homepage with the most important data to you available at a glance. Polar, on the other hand, favours a diary view with various items added throughout the day, but it means that even if you hop onto the app immediately after finishing a run, you may have to scroll down through your feed to find it. Not really an issue if you're bouncing the data straight out to Strava anyway, but worth a mention. Generally speaking, I would say that while you're training, both systems offer you everything you need to keep tabs on your training load and general fitness levels. The difference for me was most noticeable during a recent period in which I was struggling to find time to get out and exercise, which was actually the thing that prompted me to go down the DC Rainmaker rabbit hole of considering a new watch. I was stuck in the house looking after poorly children, etc., and I started poking around the Garmin Connect app, wondering how my baseline fitness level was represented by the various metrics. At this time, I was also researching a new Apple Watch for my partner, which led me down all sorts of YouTube videos and reviews. I realised the Instinct 2 was missing some of the sensors and metrics of the newer Garmin models, at least some of which were available on the Grit X2. But is there any point in your watch being able to measure your skin temperature if you then can't find that information easily in the app. As I mentioned, I'm yet to properly try out the navigation features of the watch, which I think could be the difference maker between an entry-level or mid-tier Garmin. But at the moment, the combination of the watch and app feels a bit like 2 steps forward and 1 step back when moving over from Garmin Connect. As a sort of summary, the Polar Grit X2 feels like it would be an incredible first running or outdoor fitness watch. Coming from a fairly well-featured Garmin, it's a less clearly attractive proposition. The watch does fit into my life easily, and once you grow accustomed to the 5-button layout, it's very easy to record an activity and access more data on the watch than you could on the Instinct 2. I have found myself poking around in the app a lot less than I did with Garmin Connect, but I know all my data is there when I do want to dive into it. My main concern when switching watches was the battery life. Would I find it annoying having to charge the watch at least once a week, having previously managed over double that? In reality, it hasn't bothered me, and the 5.0 update hiding the battery level a bit more has made me even less bothered about it. I think £225 for the Grit X2 is a bit of a bargain in 2025-26. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to someone in the market for a new running watch at that price, especially if they were starting from scratch. I've grown quite fond of the slightly odd colourway, and I really like the strap. The loop is a bit trickier to recommend with the app in its current guise. I think the glanceable data collection of Garmin Connect would be a much better fit, but it does feel like the platform has the potential to mature into something useful. The main issue for me is not being able to chuck it into a drawer and be reassured I could grab it and throw it on for a day or night without the battery having run down. I do very much like being able to give my wrist a rest and keep going, keep running, keep tracking my sleep, but not wearing the Grit X2 for a couple of nights. So these are my early impressions of both devices. I have some running events planned this year that will involve navigation and a fair whack of battery life needed, so stay tuned for a follow-up at some point this year.